Hello, and welcome to Medicamentum Authentica, episode number 3. This is Dr. Andrew Kaufman. I want to thank all my new subscribers and listeners for checking me out on Crow 777. I did 2 interviews this week, speaking largely about germ theory and the question of the existence of viruses that cause human disease. I hope a lot of people learn from that, and I know many people have said they have. And I would like to once again thank everyone for joining me, and I am planning to put out some new material. I'm going to try to record 1 show a week. And I want to make part of that show a question and answer session so that I can address all the issues from my listeners. So I'm going to include some instructions below in the show notes. And if you simply email me a question during the week and put the right subject line, I will do my best to include that in the next episode. And that's going to be at the end. So that should be very exciting to have some audience participation. So today, I'd like to actually dedicate this show to a listener, someone that I've known for a while, whose name is Lucy. So thank you for suggesting this topic, Lucy. And I'm going to talk today about blood pressure. And of course, in talking about that, we can't leave water out of the equation. So I'm going to spend some time talking about water. Very important. Water is life, people. So blood pressure. Let's start off with that. So what is it? So blood pressure is actually the pressure inside your arteries, the blood vessels that carry blood away from your heart to your organs. And there are 2 numbers in the blood pressure, as you all know, the systolic pressure and the diastolic pressure. And that simply measures the highest pressure right after the left side of the heart pumps the blood, and the lowest pressure when the heart is relaxed between beats. And blood pressure is extremely common among adults in our society, high blood pressure. And it's probably the most commonly prescribed medication that people take are blood pressure medications. So I think this is a really important issue to shed some light on. So why is blood pressure important in the first place? Well, this comes down really to fluid dynamics and mechanics, and it has to do with if there is enough pressure inside the vessel, then the blood can keep moving. And this is related to various physical parameters, such as the diameter of the inside of the blood vessel, how stiff it is, and the volume of blood. And why is it important to have blood pressure? Because if your blood pressure goes too low, you will not live. And the reason is because there needs to be high enough pressure so that the blood can actually make it all the way to the end organ or target organ. So those would be, organs like the kidneys, the liver, the heart, the lungs, and of course the brain. So if the blood pressure is high, which happens to many people, what is the reason? Well, the body is very intelligent and it knows how to regulate things to keep us in optimal health. So when our body starts raising the blood pressure, there must be a reason. And the reason most likely is that there's not enough blood going to those target organs. So the target organs send a signal back to the regulatory centers in the brain that tell the heart to increase the output. It tells the blood vessels to constrict or narrow so that the pressure can be increased, and then enough blood can then go to those target organs, and this is critical. Now, there is a reason why the blood pressure is not sufficient to perfuse, that's the medical word for supply enough blood to the target organs. And I'd like to talk about that, and then I'd like to talk about, well, what actually happens if we lower the blood pressure with medications without addressing the underlying problem. So I think the most common underlying problem causing people to have high blood pressure is actually chronic dehydration at a low level, not severe enough dehydration to make you lightheaded or overtly symptomatic, but enough that your organs just don't get quite enough blood, and the compensatory mechanisms have to kick in so that the pressure is increased and enough blood is perfusing all of your organs. So this obviously can be quite simply remedied by increasing your water intake. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in just a couple of minutes, but let me talk about one of the other possible reasons for high blood pressure. Many of us live a lifestyle that we have exposure to lots of toxic substances. Many of these we have very limited control over, such as air pollution, for example. However, we do have control over quite a lot of this, and it has to do with drinking water, that I'll talk more about today, but also with food, especially processed foods, with personal hygiene products, even our clothing can cause us to absorb toxic substances. So as these accumulate in our body, because most of us are not actively detoxing to get rid of these, we do certainly get rid of some through various mechanisms that waste products leave our body, such as urination, defecation, and sweating, even through our exhalations, breathing. But if you're not purposely increasing the detox, then you're going to be accumulating this toxic burden over the course of your lifetime. And your body, more specifically your immune system, is very active in deciding where to store these toxins in your body. And many of the modern ailments are actually related to where your body stores these toxins. If your body makes the decision to store them in your blood vessels, well, this is going to cause a sort of sludge to build up in the blood vessels that will narrow the inside and slow down the flow of your blood. So this could very easily result in this same kind of compensatory mechanism where the end organs don't receive enough blood because the sludge is stopping things up, and the brain sends messages to the blood vessels and the heart to increase the pressure. Okay, great. So you see that the way to correct this underlying problem would be through reducing your exposure to toxic substances and by undergoing some cleansing procedures. And these, I'm going to have to do a show all about detoxification because there's a lot of complexity to it. So we'll save that for later. But I do want to talk about what may be obvious to you now thinking this issue through, that if you use medications to lower the blood pressure, you may have unforeseen consequences. Now, different blood pressure medications have some different mechanisms of how they work. Some of them work through the heart, many of them dilate the blood vessels, and some of them even work through the kidney system that regulates the blood pressure. But all of these mechanisms will effectively reduce the blood pressure to varying degrees depending on the dose of medication in the person. And when you're in a situation where the organs are not getting enough blood for various reasons, as I mentioned, and then there's compensation from your body to increase the pressure to get the proper amount of blood to the organs, then you artificially lower the blood pressure with medications. Well, guess what? Now the organs are going to be once again in a state where they don't have enough blood supply. Now, some people they will compensate further and ramp up their blood pressure to counteract the effects of the blood pressure medications. But there's going to be a limit to the ability of our bodies to compensate. So as the doctor increases the dose of medications or adds multiple blood pressure medications to get those numbers down into that arbitrary range they've determined. And by the way, the guidelines for the target blood pressure keeps going lower every couple of years. They have a new consensus meeting. So this would result in people taking more medications at higher doses and making sure that that blood pressure gets low. So this is why we see in many long-term studies of people taking blood pressure medications that there are risks of end organ damage. And specifically, the kidneys are most vulnerable to this lower level of blood supply. There's also the fact that blood pressure medications have not really been shown to have any real meaningful benefit. For example, they've not been shown to increase your lifespan. There is some evidence that they may be able to prevent a heart attack, but it's pretty ridiculous. Something like several hundred patients need to take the medication for a period of years before one person has one less heart attack. So this is not really a meaningful outcome, and it's actually very difficult to interpret because it's such a low frequency event. But this is, if you're taking this, it would be a real long shot. It would be 1 in a million type of gambling strategy, especially knowing that as a result of taking these medications, you're actually decreasing the blood supply to your organs and causing them a bit of oxygen starvation. So as you can see, that the bottom line here is that blood pressure medications are not going to be very helpful, and that if you have high blood pressure, it's a signal that you are doing something that is causing harm and decreasing the blood flow to your organs. And if you simply can figure out what that is and correct it, then your blood pressure will no longer need to be elevated and will come down to the normal levels, and your organs will get the appropriate amount of blood. Quite simple. Quite a simple problem to solve. So let me spend a little time talking about water, because water is such an important subject. Our bodies are primarily containing water. Much of the weight of our bodies is water. And all of the chemical reactions that occur in our bodies occur in an aqueous environment, so in a water environment. It's an absolutely key nutrient for us. And I think in our lifestyle today, we do a number of things that rob us of adequate hydration. So overall, I think the most common is just simply not drinking enough water. And then the perhaps even bigger problem is people drinking other beverages that are not water that have chemicals, sugar, caffeine, etc. I think many of you may know that caffeine is actually a mild diuretic, which is like a water pill. So it actually would dehydrate us slightly. Even though we're drinking a fluid containing the caffeine, we end up with a negative water balance. So if you have a lot of caffeinated beverages and you have high blood pressure, there's probably a relationship there. So I would encourage my listeners to primarily drink nothing but water. Now, of course, I don't want people to never enjoy other things, and I certainly enjoy other beverages from time to time, but you want it to be very minimal and primarily water only. I would say, on an overall basis, at least 90% of your fluid intake should be water. So what kind of water? So this is really important as well. If you look at tap water, and I'm going to talk briefly about bottled water. It's something I certainly do not recommend because you never know what you're getting. And I think many varieties of bottled water could just be tap water in a bottle. And then you have the added problem that plastic from the water bottle itself actually leaches into the water. And this process could be accelerated if the bottles are kept in a hot warehouse that's not air conditioned, for example, and you never know where those bottles have been stored or for how long or how old they are. So I would definitely discourage you from drinking any bottled water. Now, tap water can contain many different things, and please forgive me if I forget something because there's so many aspects to the water, but I'm going to mention the most common contaminants that you may find in your tap water samples. So this first thing could be heavy metals. There could be lead, chromium, arsenic, and others. And these metals have been certainly found in lots of tap water testing samples over the years. You could find pharmaceuticals in your water, which is a real growing problem of how do we dispose with unused pharmaceuticals. Certainly in many areas, fluoride, which is a waste product of aluminum mining and a toxic substance, is added to the waters. They tell us this is for the purpose of oral hygiene and preventing tooth decay, but that fails on many levels. First of all, if you actually look at the scientific research behind that, it is very inconclusive and poorly done. Secondly, fluoride has been classified even by the Centers for Disease Control as a neurotoxic substance. In the early 2000s, they put out a press release instructing parents not to use fluoridated water to mix formula for their infants because it was toxic to their nervous system. So as you can imagine, if it's toxic to their nervous system, it's toxic to everyone's nervous system. Chlorine, we all know chlorine is used as an antiseptic to kill microorganisms in water. There are agricultural runoff products, including pesticides, herbicides, fertilizer. There may be even microorganisms, including parasites, from agricultural waste. A lot of people who may think well water is clean and live in a rural area, they may be surprised to know that nearby farms may be leaching all kinds of toxic chemicals into the water table that's contaminating their well. And then lastly, parasites. So I think there's some pretty good evidence that H. pylori, which is the parasite that can cause stomach and ulcers of the duodenum, the small intestine, Cryptosporidium, other possibilities, Giardia. So there are a lot of things that would be potentially adverse to your health found in regular tap water. And I don't believe that we can really trust our public water supply anymore. And I include well water with this. In fact, I didn't mention, I want to also add about microplastics, because I've heard some research where they've gone around the world testing various fresh water supplies and have not found one that is free of microplastics. And microplastics are largely from clothing, polyester and other plastic clothing, that when you put it in the washing machine, little tiny particles come off of the plastic and get into the wastewater. There also used to be a lot of cosmetic products like shampoos and facial scrubs and such that had these microplastic beads in there for their abrasive properties. And who knows how many of those particles are out there in the world at this point. So these microplastics have contaminated our freshwater supply and our drinking water sources. So what is the remedy to clean up your water and have water that's safe to drink? Well, it's simple. I would recommend two different possibilities. One would be distillation, to distill your water, and the second would be using a reverse osmosis filtration. Now, I know there are some other types of filters, like the Berkey filter, for example, that may be very good at removing many of these contaminants from the water. However, many of them yield a water that is alkaline or basic. And I know a lot of listeners have probably heard about the trend of alkaline water. And I think that this is a misguided trend, because the alkalinity issue is really important in our blood, that our blood stays alkaline in order to protect us from certain adverse health conditions. But different parts of our body actually have different acid-base requirements and different pHs. So in our stomach, for example, we have an extremely acidic pH. I think it's between 1 and 2, and that's because we have special cells in our stomach that make hydrochloric acid. And this is very important for digesting food, obviously, but it also provides a barrier to any parasites that we accidentally eat, that many of them cannot survive the highly acidic environment of our stomach. So it's very important that our stomach maintains this environment for its optimal functioning. If we ingest alkaline water, then we counteract this effect and may raise the pH, because our stomach may not be able to pump out enough acid to keep up with the alkaline water. So I definitely do not recommend any alkaline waters. If you do want to alkalinize your blood and you're concerned about that, you can simply do this by deep breathing, especially with long exhalations. Whenever you exhale, you're actually removing acid from your blood in the form of carbon dioxide, so that you can achieve an increased alkalinity in your blood, which is where you want it to be alkaline, by simply doing this kind of deep breathing. I think you can find several tutorials on this type of breathing on the internet, and it's not very difficult. So back to the preferred types of water. So I'll talk a little bit about both. Distilled water is when you basically heat the water to the boiling point, and the water comes off as steam and rises up and basically leaves anything else that was in it behind, because the other substances do not boil at that temperature, and some of them may be actually solids. And then the steam rises up and is caught in a condenser where it is cooled back down to water, and it drips into a separate container. And then all of the contaminants are left behind in the original container. So this is a very good method of water purification. And you can buy a tabletop distiller for a few $100s that essentially looks like a large coffee maker. And there'll be a glass carafe that the distilled water will collect in. The other option, and the one that I prefer just because of convenience purposes, because with the distiller you do have to, fill it up, remember to fill it up, and then use it for, so that you can have enough to use throughout the day. With the reverse osmosis system, what I've done is I've installed the filtration system underneath my sink, and there's a special faucet that comes out the reverse osmosis water, so I can have flowing water on demand, basically. And this is very convenient for cooking when I use it to clean vegetables and such during my food preparation, as well as just being able to fill up drinking glasses and water bottles to take with me when I leave home. And reverse osmosis is perhaps not quite as pure as distilled, but it is very, very close, and it is good enough to remove all of those contaminants that are dangerous that I was discussing. So both of these methods are very good approaches. I want to just briefly address the concern about trace minerals, because a lot of people worry that if you drink very pure water without solutes in it or things dissolved in it, that it will actually pull the minerals out of your body. So I think this concern is a little bit misguided, in my opinion. You actually want the water to come in and pull things out, because it's going to pull out toxins first, because most of the electrolytes or chemicals that our body really needs, our body will tend to hold on to and not remove them, or not allow them to be removed. But the toxins will get pulled into the blood supply, hopefully by using this very pure water, and then they'll be able to be excreted through the kidneys or the liver. So this could actually be beneficial for detoxification, as well as reducing the toxins that you're getting from the water supply in the first place. But I do want to make an important statement about trace minerals in general, because none of us are getting enough trace minerals in our modern world. And the reason for this is that modern agricultural practices essentially strip the minerals out of the soil. So we end up with a food supply that is really devoid of these trace minerals. And let me just say what these trace minerals are for anyone who may not be familiar. What they are a variety of metals that our body uses mostly as cofactors for different enzymes. And enzymes are usually proteins that help make reactions, important reactions for our biological functioning happen, and they often have metals as cofactors. And most of you would be familiar with iron from hemoglobin, because iron is what binds the oxygen in our blood and makes it red, like the color of rust. So there are many different metals like this, such as molybdenum, for an example, that you may not know of, that our body uses in trace amounts. So since we're not getting enough of these in our food, and we cannot rely on tap water or even well water to give us the right balance of these minerals, I recommend that everyone take a trace mineral supplement. The one that I like best is called Shilajit. That's Shilajit. And it's essentially a tar from a decayed forest floor millions of years ago, that all of the mineral material from that decaying flora and fauna has been compacted into this tarry substance. And the shilajit that I use is from Russia, and it's been tested to make sure that it does not have troublesome quantities of any dangerous metals. And it has quite a broad spectrum of different trace minerals. Now, the other option is what's called fulvic minerals, or sometimes referred to as fulvic acid. And this is a very, very similar preparation, but it is generally from Europe or North America and may not have quite as broad a spectrum of trace minerals. However, it still should be more than adequate, and if that's what's available to you, I encourage you to use that. So I recommend taking this trace mineral supplement several times a week. It doesn't have to be a daily thing, but it definitely is an important consideration. All right, well, I think that's just about everything I wanted to say about blood pressure and water this week. I want to thank everyone for your participation and listening. And please, if you enjoyed this, click the like button below. And if you're not yet a subscriber, please subscribe to my channel. And I hope to be able to give a lot of good information out moving forward. And let me just remind everyone that if you'd like to ask me a question that I would address in a future show, please check the show notes below and look for the instructions to send me an email with your question. All right, thank you very much, everyone. I look forward to seeing you next time.